He'll make it for sure. Now that's why I backed him on TABtouch.
Hey, Luke.
Yes, Gene Simmons?
He's probably the best when it comes to this stuff.
Thanks, Gene.
You've got the touch. You got the touch. You got the power. Got the touch? Choose TABtouch. Better your bet. Download the app today.
Chances are you're about to lose. For free and confidential support, call 1-800-858-858 or visit gamblinghelponline.org.au.
Hello and welcome to Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle, and we know our two championship series teams, Cody. We know it's going to be either Melbourne United or the Tasmania JackJumpers celebrating an NBL championship this season after two amazing playoff series that both went to 3 games. So we'll have a look back on those two series, look at the eliminated Illawarra Hawks and the Perth Wildcats, and have a look back on their seasons. And we've got the WNBL Grand Final also going to a third game as well, Cody. So plenty for us to get through on this week's show. We're here, as always, thanks to Hoop 7 and TABtouch. I'm Chris Pike, but the man everyone's tuning to hear from, the former Sydney Kings and Illawarra Hawks forward, Warwick Senators championship winning captain, St. Louis Billikens star, Cody Ellis. Thanks for joining me again.
Mate, big week of basketball.
Yes.
Goodness me. Look, a little odd, obviously, doing this a little later in the week than we usually do, but just some unbelievable games that we've witnessed both in the NBL and WNBL.
Yes.
So, lots to talk about and looking forward to it.
Yes, we got plenty to fill an hour with those two series from the NBL, and we'll talk about the WNBL Grand Final that'll go to Game 3 as well. So no shortage of things to talk about, as always, Cody. We'll go through the series in more depth, but your first reaction to Melbourne and Tasmania being the two teams in the Grand Final?
Yeah, look, I think it didn't matter who was going to go through the Grand Final; it would have been deserved.
Yes.
I think obviously Hawks with the dream run that they've been on would have been well deserved to be there. The Wildcats, with the way they turned their season around from early, deserved to be there as well. So there was always going to be two teams that probably fell short of what could have been, what should have been, maybe. But Melbourne and JackJumpers proven that they deserve to be there.
Last time we did a show, you talked about how you felt like the right 4 teams had made the playoffs, and we had the 4 best teams. After how competitive both series were, I think clearly these were the 4 best teams, and really all 4 probably championship caliber teams.
Yeah, definitely. It's it's no surprise that both series went to 3 games, and I think we actually predicted that would happen before the series had started. So, I'm really happy that they did. It's pretty cool that 2 of those games in the Hawks and United series went to overtime.
Yes.
It's made for some free basketball, which we always enjoy. And the games between Tassie and Perth were also pretty elite.
From memory as well, I think your predictions are spot on. I'm pretty sure you predicted Melbourne, Tasmania to be the 2 teams that made it.
Yeah, look, I think that is what I ended up saying early.
Yes.
I can't remember. It's been so much going on. Yeah, look, I think from the start of the playoffs, we both picked probably Tassie to actually win the whole thing. I think we figured they were probably in the best form of anyone. And look, Melbourne with just their incredible amount of talent and how well drilled they are, I think is it's set up for a pretty interesting grand final series.
Now, we'll go through what we saw on the court a little bit later, but a lot of the drama from the series surrounded the Perth and Tasmania series, and it started at the end of game 1. I want to talk about what ended up being a suspension for Marcus Lee, and to get your reaction, because we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. So to set the scene, the game was over. So Jordan Usher going up for a dunk at the end of the game, and Marcus Lee challenges him, and I think fair enough, an unsportsmanlike foul was called. It was a hard foul. They reviewed it at the time. They decided it was just an unsportsmanlike foul, and I think most people would agree that should have been the end of the whole thing. But over the next 48 hours, chaos sort of ensued, and Marcus Lee ended up being suspended, and it lit up the series a lot more. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, look, it was not something that I actually saw coming. I didn't think that there would be suspensions or I thought maybe a fine.
Yep.
It wasn't a good foul. It was a pretty shocking foul. That,
Yes.
And it is what it is. It was really awkward. Usher went up and kind of threw the ball away from his body as well, and Marcus Lee came up.
And he double pumped, which I think threw Marcus off a little bit.
It did, but just the way it all kind of happened, it just didn't look good, right? Unsportsmanlike foul, absolutely. They even looked at it for a disqualifying foul, and I think if it's something that at the time isn't deemed bad enough to throw him out of the game, then why would you have to miss games for it? It just...
And there was a decent review. That review probably took 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So once they've looked at it for that long, I don't know why they needed to look at it again.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. And look, Perth had challenged it and took it to the league and said that they need to investigate it further, which is well within their rights, right? I think quite some time ago, Illawarra did that to Perth with Conklin and Greg Hire, I think. And, I think Greg ended up getting a fine for it. And I don't think a game was missed, but...
I think it was a suspended sentence.
Yeah, so it happens, right?
Suspension.
Yeah. Look, it happens. It happens, right? And the club's looking out for their players as much as possible, which is totally understandable.
I don't mind that the Wildcats wanted it looked at.
No.
I mean, they're not the ones that ended up coming to the decision to suspend him, but I felt like potentially the league threw the Wildcats under the bus a little bit by saying that we looked at it because they complained, and that put a target on the Wildcats' back heading into Game 2 in pretty hostile territory already.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. And especially with Usher coming out into the game and then getting boos, I was a bit thrown by that.
I'm not sure what he did wrong except go up for a dunk.
And look, it's one of those things that it kind of goes hand in hand. It's like, well, you're the one that fouled. You're the reason that Marcus Lee was suspended, all this sort of stuff. So, look, it happens, and each environment, especially Tassie and Perth, is super hostile on the road. So it's the fans get into it, and it's good. It's good. But yeah, I think that it wasn't really needed. I do think that it's fair to have a look at it because there was head-high contact, and he did kind of fall awkwardly. It was lucky that he landed on his feet because it could have ended. There was potential there for some injury for sure. So. It's one of those things you can't look at the outcome of, well, he did land on his feet. It's, well, was there potential for injury? Yeah. And look, I think there probably was. So yeah, look, end of the day is what it is. It happened. I think Tassie did a good job of handling it. And, ended up getting through, despite it all going on.
I think they made the right decision to not try to challenge it as well, because that risked losing him for 2 games. Yeah. I mean, he played well in Game 3. I don't know if they could come back to Perth and win in Game 3 without him. So I think they just had to suck it up and hope they could win that Game 2 without him, because they couldn't win the whole series without him, I don't think.
No, I totally agree. And that was a smart play. Look, it was a quick turnaround between games as well. Yeah. So, had they have, wanted to put something together to challenge it, then it would have been a pretty quick little review of it and put a case forward. But look, I think they made the right decision and look, accept it. All right, 1 game, that's fine, move on. That's kind of what they've been doing all season anyway, in that next man up mentality.
Last thing on that, I've heard the argument that he didn't need to challenge Usher for the dunk because the game was over. But knowing Scott Roth, if he has a centre out on the court that doesn't try to defend his bust in that situation, I know he got suspended for Game 2. He probably doesn't play Game 2 anyway because of a coach's decision. He had to challenge it, didn't he? He did the right thing by defending it.
It's definitely one of those split-second decisions as well. And as a player, doesn't matter what time's on the clock or what the score is, you challenge it. Again, it was
especially in a series.
Yeah, it was probably not challenged in the way that it should have been. But yeah, I don't blame him at all for going up with it. So yeah, it's certainly not something that I expected him not to do.
Yeah. I mean, I could only imagine the reaction of Scott Roth
would have been
if he went unchallenged.
Pretty fiery, I'm sure.
He would have copped the wrath. The other fascinating aspect, away from what we saw on the court, was Keanu Pinder. So he completely dominated Game 1. It was the best shooting performance we've seen of his career. He knocked down 5 3-pointers and took full advantage of the rope that Will Magnay gave him and was incredible. Didn't have the same impact, it's fair to say, over the next 2 games. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of focus on the fact that he didn't look quite right after a couple of knocks. And A lot of speculation about it potentially being a concussion, but the Wildcats, I think they were forced to take him to a concussion protocols test before Game 3, and he was given the all clear to play, but clearly it rattled him, and it's unfortunate that he had to have that hanging over his head going into Game 3 because he didn't look like he was focused, and I think the fact that he came out without a mask, he was trying to send a message and potentially focused on the wrong things, and we're not medical experts, so we can't comment on how he was physically, but mentally he didn't look quite right over the last 2 games. I'll get you to react to John Rillie's comments after the game shortly, but before that, what did you make of the whole situation?
Look, we can only comment on what we saw on the screens. So, it's one of those things that Game 2, he definitely, it looked like he was concussed, or there was something seriously wrong going on. Saw a snippet of the timeout where, he had head in a towel with the medical staff with him, comes out, has a good hit on Magne, no head collision at all, gets up, stands there for a second, and then kind of falls himself back to the floor in what looked like him being pretty dizzy and out of it. So look, not a great look, obviously. And then seeing vision of the couple of little head knocks that he got in that first game, and a lot of it all just kind of went hand in hand with, well, that seems like a concussion, right? Again, the Perth medical staff obviously looked at him, and they're the experts in it. So if he was right to play, he was right to play. It is what it is, and it is a tough one. And I think the fact that the medical staff from Perth kind of got a please explain from the league about the Doolittle one earlier in the season, I think is why it was magnified. I think if it was probably on another team that hadn't had something like that happen before, it probably would have been a lot less of a point. So, look, it is what it is. And you're right, he came out in that third game without his mask on. And look, I've played in a face mask before. It's not fun. And if you get hit, it hurts not just your nose, but your whole face. So I'm thinking that, especially with that one with Drimmick early in the first game, it kind of looked like he hit the top of his head, but also the top of his mask, which also would have just forced that mask straight through his face. So whether Keanu's come out and said, all right, I'm getting hit, but it's not necessarily, to my face, it's my face mask that keeps getting hit. So it's, I think Liam Santa Maria was saying that he'd trained a few times without his face mask. So it wasn't something brand new to him. Obviously, he hadn't played without it. But whether or not it was, all right, see how this goes without it to start with. But look, it probably wasn't overly fair on Keanu because there was all this talk about it. And obviously, as much as players say they don't read into stuff, you hear stuff, right? You hear it. You can't really avoid it too much.
And I think we have learned about him. He's a very emotional person, and I think these things do get to him. We've seen it a few weeks back with once, we don't need to talk about it, but something else came out about his dad, and he had a point to prove because I think he felt it was unfair that he had to deal with that at the time.
Absolutely.
So I do think he's very emotionally high strung, which is not a bad thing, but I do think these things get to him.
Oh, for sure. And he's still a young guy. He's still trying to find his way and find his feet. And look, the stuff that came out, with his dad, and then obviously, Keanu being attached to it all it is what it is, but it's not fair. It's, Keanu has nothing to do with that kind of thing. So it's tough. And it's something that, like I said, as much as you try and avoid it, it's there. With the way social media is now and all the podcasts and, all the reports and all the TV shows now, it's there and it's in your face and you can't avoid it when you're within it. So, look, he didn't come out as aggressive in Game 3 as we've seen. He turned down a few of those threes early, which I would have loved to see him let him fly. Straight away, as soon as he catches it, stuff it, let it fly. You've shown that you've been working on your shot, right? Game 1 proved that. And all of a sudden, that would have changed the game because it would have drawn Magne, it would have drawn Lee out of the paint a bit more. And so look, it's certainly been an interesting little tidbit all over Twitter. And look, I think probably not overly fair on Keanu, but again, that's kind of part of this whole thing is all the surrounding noise as well.
And it was on John Rillie's mind as well. So immediately after the game, before he talked about the game, he wanted to sort of address that situation. So let's hear what he had to say, and then I'll get your reaction to that as well.
Let me first address the Keanu Pinder situation. We have a qualified medical staff. I have my players' well-being at the highest of my list. When we have uneducated comments being made about something that happened, I would question whether those people really have the players' well-being at the forefront of their mind. Very disappointing. We have professionals to handle situations. Very disappointing.
I mean, it's hard to argue with him because the club was put in a position where it was made to look like they didn't have their players' best interests at heart. What are your thoughts on his reaction?
Yeah, look, he's spot on. He's spot on. And like I said before, like I think the reason it was so magnified was because of what happened earlier in the season with Doolittle and the medical staff not picking that up 2-3 minutes earlier. Look, everything he said was 100% correct. And, like I also said, it's all part of, the surroundings and the stories and, what the guys on the sidelines are seeing, like in terms of the commentators and stuff like that. Like it's just part of it, and I've no doubt that Rillie and his staff have their players' well-being at the highest priority. Like that's not even a question. Certainly in my mind, I can't speak for other people, but it's a coach's duty to have that, at the forefront of their mind. So it's all part of it. It's all part of it. There's got to be stories that come out of games. There's got to be, certain things that are spoken about. And when a guy comes out and has one of his best games of his career, really, in game one, and then is very obviously a different player in game two, there's stuff that people want to talk about. And I guess that was probably the more glaring thing that people saw.
Yeah, I mean, the difference was incredible. So he had those 25 points, 5 3-pointers in game one, and then only 5 shots in game 2 for 7 points, and then 4 shots in game 3 for 0 points. The difference was incredible. It was.
And look, in game 2, I mean, Rillie came out in the press conference afterwards, after game 2, and said that it was due to foul trouble. Yes. And that's right. Then, he kind of got caught up a few times early with his fouls, and then he would sit for long periods, and then he'd come out and pretty much foul straight away. Yeah. So he never got into a rhythm in that game. When he was out there early, you're right, he just didn't look like the same player. And then, it's one of those things that he looked out of it on the sidelines. But, I don't think that's something that's, that people can read into too much because, I mean, he's obviously frustrated at himself as well.
I mean, it was easy for us to think that it was because he wasn't feeling well in his head, but maybe he was just frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. He's clearly proven that he is one of the key players of that team, and he's a big reason why they were second on the ladder. Obviously, he's had games where the stats haven't stood out, but he is so important to that team, and what he's done for that team this year has been so important and probably underpraised, I think. Look, he was obviously frustrated, and then he'd sit for a long period and then come in for 1 or 2 up and backs and then get a little ticky-tacky foul and have to sit again. So he never got into a rhythm. So I think that, looking back on all of them, I think that's probably what was going on. And look, he certainly had plenty of attention from the medical staff in game 2. So, no doubt that they were doing their due diligence and getting, the best out of him and not putting him in a bad situation.
All right, Cody, that's the heavy lifting done. Let's get that out of the way. Let's take a deep breath. When we come back, we'll talk about what we saw on the court in these 2 series.
Sounds good.
He'll make it for sure. That's why I backed him on TABtouch.
You got the touch. You got the power. Got the touch? Choose TABtouch. Better your bet. Download the app today.
Imagine what you could be buying instead.
Okay, back on Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle. I'm here with Cody Ellis again this week. Let's talk about what we saw on the court. Let's start with Melbourne United, the Illawarra Hawks in that series, Cody. The first 2 games went to overtime, were incredible matchups, and I couldn't help but feel like the loser of both those games would have been kicking themselves afterwards. The Hawks were in control of that game 1 in Melbourne. They They led by 16 points with 7 minutes to go. They found a way to lose, or maybe Melbourne snatched it off them. Melbourne did take things up a level to get the game to overtime. There was some interesting calls late in the game as well. The old home cooking was in effect as well, but there was a lot going on in that game one. It's impossible to feel anything but the Hawks would have felt like, when they now reflect, that was their great missed opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, having them on the ropes all game, and then knowing that, all right, if we go and win this one, we go home to secure a spot in the grand final. That's a lot of pressure for Melbourne to go and try and get that win in Illawarra, down 1-0 and losing home court advantage, in that first game. So Hawks had their number all game. It was, Melbourne came out exactly how I thought they would. I didn't think it would last 3.5 quarters, but they came out exactly how I thought they would. Yep. Obviously a little rusty, you can only do so much on the training court, and you can only, have intra-club scrimmages so much, and your game fitness takes a little bit of a hit, and it's a long time to be sitting there waiting to play a game, especially a finals game. Yeah. So, look, not overly surprised, but if you're Illawarra, you can't give up a 16-point lead midway through the fourth quarter, especially on the road. They were so good for that 3.5 quarters, and all of a sudden they start making a run. Melbourne kind of put the clamps on a little bit, and that bit of full court pressure, and making some silly passes, and I think Tatum probably overcoaching a little. I think that there was a few subs late, especially a guy like Kyle Adnam coming in after not playing at all.
All of a sudden he was playing more than he had played all season in their biggest moment of the season. Yeah, and look, I think that, and again, he's the one that is was the coach of the year candidate. So, we can only talk so much on it. But he's still learning on the job, isn't he?
He is. Yeah. He is, absolutely. And I think in that situation, I understand you don't want Sam to be the one to get the ball and get fouled, but he's a great passer. Have him inbound it. You know what I mean? So there's a couple of things that went wrong there for sure. Obviously, the glaring thing is the calls and the non-calls late in the game. But if the Hawks don't let them back into it, that's not even a talking point. So, it's one of those things that, a lot of people were saying that, it was the refs that determined that game. I think they certainly had a hand in it, because there was some fairly glaringly obvious fouls that were and weren't called that really swayed the way the game was being played a little in that last couple minutes.
The one that stood out was the holding from Joe Lualichul on Gary Clark, because it happened before the ball was in play. So if it was called correctly, it should have been an unsportsmanlike foul. And at that point, having 2 foul shots plus possession, the Hawks would have closed the game out.
Yes, they would have. They absolutely would have. And look, that's the thing that really got me, was the fact that they went to review to see if it was actually out on JLA.
Yeah, and they didn't look at the foul.
Well, the issue is they can't call that foul after the fact. If it's not called in live play, then they can't go back and call that. But there is a ref standing right there on that baseline. I do not understand how you cannot see that.
It was a bear hug plus having his jersey in his hands.
Yes. I honestly don't understand how that can be missed. That is one of the most obvious fouls that you'll see. And especially late in the game, you can't miss that. If you've been deemed good enough to be a ref in a final series, you cannot miss a call like that. It's pretty freaking wild that it was missed. So, look, it is what it is. I think Melbourne did a heck of a job to figure it out late, and look, it was Delhi that kept him in the game the whole way. I say in the game, 16 points isn't in the game. No. You know what I mean? In a finals game, that's not in the game. But he kept them in striking distance. With the way he played and the way he was knocking down the 3 ball. So it's one that I think the Hawks look back on and will be kicking themselves. I think it's one that Melbourne looked back on and went, we stole that. Yes. And we saved our season because we stole that.
I think so. For a lot of reasons. They were always going to be rusty.
Yes.
So to escape after falling down the hole they did. But just on Delhi, you mentioned him. That's one of the best games he's played in his life. Look at the numbers. 30 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 6 of 10 from 3. I don't know if the numbers even do it justice, the influence he had on the result.
Yeah, and it wasn't just him making those threes, I think it was the timing of some of them.
Yeah.
You know, he was just so aggressive. He came out like he was ready to put them on his shoulders and drag them to a championship series. And look, he did that this whole series. Yeah. He was unbelievable. The games to follow probably didn't really do him justice on the stat sheet, but he was so influential for this whole series.
Game 2 was probably even more wild, and this is one where I felt like Melbourne missed an opportunity to close
Very
out
much
the
so.
series. The Hawks found a way to get it to overtime, and then they were too good in overtime. But to get it to overtime, it took a Davo Hickey offensive rebound. He's gone from a guy who was not in the rotation under Jacob Jackomas, and even in the early weeks under Justin Tatum. He ended up the season being one of their most important players.
Very much so.
Remarkable story.
Oh, he was unbelievable. And just his energy and want, I think, is, you know, I've mentioned it before, he's the perfect player for the Illawarra Hawks, you know, for that town, for that club. You know, he's just kind of epitomizes everything about them and the city. So, look, I expect him to be a, you know, major focal point to re-sign him in the off-season for them. But he was unreal. And, you know, he was the one that I was sitting there dumbfounded why he wasn't in the game late in that game 1 because of this little stuff. You know, there was times where, you know, Melbourne came up with an O board where if Hickey's in the game, maybe he doesn't come up with it, but he gets a hand on it, right? And then it fumbles somewhere, and then maybe someone from the Hawks picks it up. And we saw that in this game, you know, late, obviously missed shot and then kind of bobbled around, and he just finds himself under the rim, kind of with probably the easiest shot he's had in his career to tie the game and save their season. And then, look, they went on to win it in overtime, and they were really good in overtime and executed really well.
What about Gary Clark and Sam Froling? They combined for 50 points and 29 rebounds, and you know they're up against Joe Loala-Chul and Ariel Hukporti and even Luke Travers, but those two guys were incredible. Yeah,
look, I think Sam absolutely dominated this series. I think he got the upper hand of both JLA and Hukporti, which is something I didn't think would happen going in. I thought he'd certainly have an influence, but not the way he did. He was so aggressive and, you know, again, just some timely buckets and stood his own on the defensive end, I think, to start game 3 and 2. JLA was super aggressive, but they figured out how to slow him down and kind of get to him a bit. And, you know, a lot of that is to do with him being just as aggressive on the offensive end and making JLO guard him and getting him in foul trouble, and then having Hukporti come in and getting him in foul trouble. And then you've got, you know, Kyle Bowen as your kind of backup then, and who's young and inexperienced. But, I mean, Clark was unbelievable, and that's not surprising in the least. We've seen that from him for most of the season. He had a bit of a slow start to the year as well under Jackomas, and then, you know, once Tatum took over, then he really showed, you know, the kind of player he is, and he was unreal as well.
How are you feeling going to game 3? It kind of felt like, to me, Melbourne had it under control most of it. The Hawks still made it very interesting late.
They did.
But what did you make of game 3?
Yeah, look, Melbourne came out like a grand final series was on the line in this one, and the Hawks didn't, which I honestly thought, with the quick turnarounds of this series, I thought that would play into the Hawks' hands more. But they just looked tired. You know, I think they came out of halftime, or, you know, out of a timeout in the third quarter, and just looked like they were drained. And Melbourne looked like they were the ones with all the energy.
Maybe that's where, coming into this series, the Hawks had the advantage because they were game hardened, but by the end of it, that freshness of Melbourne was a big factor.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. It definitely was. And look, I think the 6-point deficit was a lot closer than what this game showed. Melbourne had it locked up from pretty much the get-go, just the way they came out and they played. You know, I think it was a 6-point game at halftime too. And I have absolutely no idea how it was a 6-point game at halftime, because Melbourne played such a good half of basketball. They were aggressive on the boards. They out-rebounded them by a fair bit. Their O boards were relentless.
They had 17 offensive rebounds for the game.
And
23 second chance points.
So there you go. You know, there's the game. There's a difference. That's something that the Hawks had done a really good job of in those first 2 games. But look, I think Travers was really good. I think he was
he had 4 of those on his own.
Yeah, and a lot of those were early when the game was in the balance, and I think he stamped his authority from the very get go. Yeah. He was aggressive early. They were obviously running stuff through him, and he showed why he's an NBA talent in the start of that one. So
he had a great series, didn't he?
He did. He was really good. And again, he's one of those guys that doesn't overly stand out.
He's one of those guys you can't tell his influence from the numbers. If you watch the game, you feel like he's one of the most influential players on the court. If you look at just the numbers, he doesn't stand out.
Yeah, you just think, oh yeah, he was out there, but his influence. I think he did a really good job on Clark in that game 3.
Clark looked exhausted more than anybody, didn't he?
He looked stuffed. Yeah. He did. He really did. And look, again, a lot of that goes. The credit goes to Travers for that, just for wearing him down over the series. Clark kind of had JLA and Huck Porty guard him a little bit throughout the series, and he really took advantage of that. And then once Travers got to him, and especially in game 3, you could see that his length and his defensive prowess was just too much late in this series.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about Melbourne because their season's still going. Yes. But as a former Illawarra Hawks player, how proud are you of what they did this season?
Yeah, it was unreal. It was so cool to see, and I was really hoping that they would make another championship series. It would be really good for the club and the city. And look, I think they're going to be a force moving forward with Tatum at the helm. I think if they can keep figuring it out and keep moving forward, and he's going to be able to recruit his own team, and if he could do this with the team that he had no hand in, then it's going to be scary to see what he can do with a team that he can put together. The only thing will be these other bigger teams being able to throw more money at some certain players. So I'm sure
you would have to think Gary Clark is a target of just about every club team in the league.
Yeah, you'd think so. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. I think he's expressed interest in coming back, so which is cool. He's a guy that we need in the league for sure.
Oh yeah.
Look, I think the club and the town should be extremely proud of that team and what they did and what they were able to do and the noise they were able to make after starting the way they did.
Yeah. I feel like we talked about it last week as well. The connection that town feels with this team is as good as it's been in a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you could see that in that game 2 where they had the biggest crowd since the 05, since 05. So it's massive, The town really gets around the club, and they really do, especially when it's an exciting brand of basketball that they put on the floor. And, I was lucky enough to be part of that last grand final team that made it there, and they do. You really feel the love. It's awesome, and the WEC gets bloody loud.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot of people in there, but they are rowdy and they get after it, and they love it. They really do.
Okay, the other series. We'll focus on what we saw on the court. So game 1, both Wildcats ended up winning 89-81. This was another interesting game, though, because the JackJumpers were on top, leading 68-62 with a bit over 7 minutes to go. Wildcats, as we talked about all season, they can turn it on like nobody else, and they outscored them 27-13 the rest of the way. Keanu Pinder a big part, as we talked about before, but 32 free throws for the game was a big factor as well. They just found a way to keep getting to the line. What did you make of game 1?
Pretty back and forth for sure. I think that, and I'd like to see if TABtouch could figure out what the payment would have been on Keanu and Delhi to both hit 5+ threes in a game. Would have been, because it would have been paying quite a bit, I think. Yes. And look, it was Keanu was elite. He was unbelievable. He was so aggressive and shooting it like he meant it. Yep. Stepping into those like he was a knockdown 3-point shooter, and that's what happened. 5 or 7 from the 3 is good for anybody. Yeah. So just his energy as well, I think was huge for them. Bryce being Bryce, I think got to the foul line early and kind of got himself going a little bit, but I mean, the JackJumpers did a really good job on Bryce for this series.
They did.
I think McDonald was unbelievable in just chasing him around and then making him play defense on the other end. I think that's something that we don't see teams do enough of, is making those elite scorers play defense on the other end. So no, look, I think It's not surprising the Cats got the first game at home. I kind of expected that to happen for sure. But, I mean, to be able to outscore them 27 to 13 with 7 to go is very impressive and something that we've seen multiple times this season from them.
Game 2 in Hobart, this was lit up like we talked about before. So there was a lot of tension and heat in the building, and it felt like the JackJumpers had a point to prove from the start, but the Wildcats still hung in there. And the Wildcats came out hot. They had to start well to try to take some of the energy out of the building, and they couldn't have started any better. No. But gradually the JackJumpers wore them down. What do you make of game 2? Yeah,
they did. They go as Scott Roth goes, and he's never too high, never too low, as we heard on the broadcast the other night in game 3. And I feel like the playing group is exactly the same way. You've got a couple guys that are the hype guys in McVeigh. He makes a big play and he gets the crowd involved and he does all that sort of stuff. But most of that team is very level-headed, starting with Milton Doyle, who is probably one of the most level-headed. You can never tell if he's having a good game or a bad game by looking at him. And I think a guy like Magnay, who has been so influential for them since coming back, is very similar. You never know if he's having a good game or a bad game just by looking at him. He's the same. They're all just very level-headed, and they knew that Perth was going to come out and throw some punches early, and they just kind of weathered the storm and stuck with it and ended up just grinding it out and getting a pretty big win really at home for them.
Doyle, McVeigh and Magnay did what you would expect. So Doyle, 24 points was terrific. McVeigh, 22 points was great. Magnay, 15 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. They did what you expected. Their X factor came from Majuk Deng.
Yeah.
So they needed somebody to step up without Marcus Lee. He's bigger than you think, and he doesn't necessarily play a lot of defense, so he doesn't use his size at one end. But 18 points in 16 minutes, that's exactly why Scott Roth was so excited to bring him into this team, and why, knowing his reaction, he was so surprised that he was even available. That's how highly he rated him. He earned his keep and showed why he was so valuable in that game.
Yeah, he really did, and I think people forget how good he is.
Yeah.
He's an elite player, and he is. He's been so consistent. Since he's been in the league. I played against him. When he was with Adelaide, and he was
grand final season against Melbourne. He was one of Adelaide's best players, especially when they had injury troubles. I think Josh Childress was out injured. He stepped up huge, and that's going back to, when was that? 2018.
About that, yeah. So look, he's been an elite player in the league, and like I said, I think people forget how good and how consistent he plays. He's one of those guys that with the ball in his hands, as soon as it's in his hands, I always think, well, it's pretty damn safe. Got to make the right play. His little fadeaways from the mid-range are money. His corner threes are cash. And he just always makes timely buckets. I think he came out, and the fact he was aggressive was exactly what they needed. After not playing for so long, I think he could have come out and just been a bit hesitant and not willing to kind of try to take the game over and play that kind of team brand of basketball, but he's exactly what they needed, that spark.
Pressure free throws. It's not easy when you haven't played a lot all season in the biggest moments of the season, but he never looked like missing at the foul line.
No, and he never has. He's always been money from there, and again, just a clutch player. And it was really cool to see after him being sidelined for so long.
Game 3. Were you surprised how dominant the JackJumpers were? We've both seen enough of Perth to think that the time was always going to come where the momentum would turn Perth's favour. They would start getting the calls their way. They'd get the crowd behind them and they'd make a run, but never happened.
No.
The JackJumpers were in control of this game. It was completely played on their terms, and they did JackJumpers things. 13 offensive rebounds to 6 for the game. 17 second chance points, 24 points off the Wildcats' turnovers, and then they were so efficient offensively. This was as much a JackJumpers game as you can see, and it was with a championship series spot on the line.
Yeah, well, that's it. You hit the nail on the head. It was JackJumpers basketball. That's what we've come to know of Scott Roth's team now, and yeah, it was clinical. I think is probably the best way to put it. And they were, like I said with Melbourne, they came out with a grand final series on the line, and the Cats are a little bit all over the place. It was an interesting one to see, especially coming home for a decider I'm not sure what their record is at home with a decider on the line, but it would be fairly impressive. I'm sure they wouldn't have lost too many deciding games at home. So yeah, look, it was an interesting one. I think they did a really good job of taking Bryce out of it, and I think kind of the way the Cats played is they also helped them take Bryce out of it a little bit. I think that there was a couple guys that probably took a few ill-advised shots early, and they never really got in a rhythm. You know, I think Keanu coming out, like we've already spoken about, with his head probably not 100% in the game, and probably thinking of some other stuff, and you know, not being that same aggressive Keanu we saw in game one, probably hurt them a little bit. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, you said it. Tassie were just clinical. They were unbelievable, and that's the Tassie that we've, you know, I think everyone has grown to enjoy watching. Yeah. You know, no matter who you barrack for.
Again, it was their guns that stepped up. Milton Doyle was incredible. 24 points, 9 assists. So he's scoring, but with the ball in his hands, he just makes the right decision, makes everyone around him better. Jack McVeigh, 27 points, 4 3-pointers. Will Magnay, terrific again, 18 points, 9 rebounds. But the guy I want to get your thoughts on is Sean McDonald, because he's a development player. Scott Roth keeps saying he's their next star, and he's playing like a next star. He's absolutely playing at that level. 9 points, 5 assists are nice numbers, but 2 other things he did was the incredible defense on Bryce Cotton, but also you have to respect him up the other end, and Bryce has to play defense on him as well. Incredible that he's still a development player doing what he's doing.
Yeah, so look, McDonald was a standout player in this game without, again, like I said, people that watch the game understand his influence, but if you look at the stat sheet, you'd be like, oh yeah, he was all right.
Yeah.
But as a development player, we haven't seen this kind of efficiency and, you know, an effect on a game from a development player. So look, he's been unbelievable, and he's kind of that perfect guy for a Scott Roth system. And he really bothered Bryce. I think, you know, his speed, and, you know, he's a bit more of a stockier defender, and you know, that little bit bigger. And they actually mentioned it on Game 3 broadcast that Bryce is not a big human being. You know, he is comparatively he's pretty small. You know, in height and just in his build as well. But that's why he's so elite, because he's, you know, so fast and crafty and all that sort of stuff. I think a guy like McDonald, who I think has some pretty similar speed, really affected him. And, you know, just the way he fought over screens and chased Bryce off them and made him go a different direction, and then pushing it down the other end, like you said, you've got to respect his three. He's one of the better 3-point shooters in the league.
Absolutely.
The way he shot at the ball this year, but not just that three ball. It's, you know, attacking the paint, these little floaters, and getting in there, and even just creating for his teammates. I think
he's so composed with the ball in his hands.
He is. He's more like a 7-8 year veteran the way he plays, rather than a development player. So look, he's going to have a long career in this league.
Last one, Cody, and then we'll take our last break. How do the Wildcats now reflect on this season now that it's finished?
Yeah, I think with the talent that they've, you know, put together, and the roster they put together, I think it was a championship series or bust for them. And it's a tough one, right? Because the amount of talent they had, and I think they were pretty well rounded. I don't think they were missing too many pieces, really. The way they started the season, you know, I think they were 2-5 at one point. People calling for Rillie's head and all that kind of stuff. And the way they turned it around was unreal. And you know, Scott Roth said it the best, that, you know, very proud of how Rillie handled himself and stuck to his guns. And that's, you know, the perfect way to put it, because, you know, he could have listened to the noise and tried things and done this, you know, this and that. And, you know, they could have probably buried themselves in a hole early in the season. And the fact that he stuck with his guns, he did what he needed to do. He tested out some lineups early that we didn't see really for the rest of the season, but ended up with, you know, the lineups that he thought was going to be successful, and they were elite, you know, for that middle part, and maybe not the last few weeks of the season. They kind of fell in a bit of a rut, but that middle part of the season, they looked unstoppable. And that's the Perth Wildcats that we thought we were going to see coming into the season. We picked Melbourne and Perth as the top two teams at the start of the season. Ended up getting it right, but we obviously didn't think that a month into the season though. So I think that if you're looking at it as a whole, probably a bit of a bust. I think that they certainly would have expected to be in a championship series, and rightfully so. If you look at it, piece by piece throughout the season, I think they can take a lot of good from it because of, I guess, the resiliency of the group and how they figured it out, and and what they got out of some guys that weren't necessarily big names, guys like Hiram Harris, who his stock would be through the roof now. I don't think there's anyone in the league that's increased his stock the way Hiram has. And a lot of that credit goes to Rillie and his coaching staff for
it just gives him that opportunity.
Exactly, for the position he put him in, and just the belief that he had in some of those guys. So I think that towards the end of that game 3, I think we started to see, wouldn't call it panic, but some of those lineups that we saw early in the season that didn't necessarily work for them. But the lineups that had been working for them weren't working in the game, so they had to try something. Yeah, look, it's a tough one, but I think that they were right where they expected to be, and couple games away from being in a championship series.
All right, Cody, we'll take our last break. When we come back, we'll talk about what we've seen in the WNBL Grand Final so far and preview this NBL Championship Series, and then we'll wrap things up.
Sounds good.
He'll make it for sure. That's why I backed him on TABtouch.
You got the touch, you got the power. Got the touch? Choose TABtouch. Better your bet. Download the app today.
Imagine what you could be buying instead.
Okay, back on Hoop 7's basketball hustle, Cody. Before we get your thoughts, and I ask you to put your neck on the line with a prediction for the NBL Championship Series, let's talk about what we've seen in the WNBL. First of all, we're 2 games into the grand final between the Southside Flyers and the Perth Lynx, and we're going to a deciding game 3. Before we talk about the 2 games, I want to get your thoughts on the Perth Lynx as a club. So you grew up with your dad being the captain of the Perth Wildcats, leading them to those first couple of championships, obviously, and then the Perth Breakers at the time were a strong club as well. They won a championship in 1992, and they were sort of replicating what the Wildcats were doing. It's been 32 years since they've won a championship, and they've had some really horrible years when they were virtually non-competitive, and they've been through a few name changes along the way. It's been a really long 32-year wait, and now they're 1 game away. They have to go and win in Melbourne to win a championship. I'm fascinated to get your opinion on the club, because you compare them with the Wildcats and they just haven't been able to quite replicate what their counterparts have done.
No, and the club's been through a heck of a lot, like you said. They were the Breakers, and then they were the Lynx and the Waves, and then the Lynx again, and then ownerships changed, and then they were hand in hand with the Cats, and then it was kind of back on their own, and there's been lots going on in the club in that 32 years. And look, they've put some pretty quality sides together, and just probably have just come short, and we've seen them in a couple of grand final series where they've fell short. I think this is probably one of the better teams that I've seen, especially after the turnover they had from last year. I think there was quite a bit of turnover from last year. We saw
only 2 players coming back.
We saw some elite players from last year's team, leave, and going into the season, I kind of thought it might have been a bit more of a down year for them, but the way they've come out and to pick up a player like Ari McDonald has been elite, absolutely elite. So, look, they've been really good. They've been really good, and it's exciting times for Perth fans for sure. Big game 3 decider, and it's look, I think that it's a tall task going back to Melbourne now to get that game 3, especially after how game 2 finished.
What makes sport so amazing is that there's no script writer that could come up with some of the storylines in sport sometimes. So the comparisons to 2 years ago when the Lynx were last in a grand final against the Melbourne Boomers is incredible. So if you go back 2 years, they won game 1 in Melbourne by 27 points against the Boomers. This time in Melbourne on Sunday against the Flyers, they won by 22 points, and they made 22 3-pointers for the game. Amy Atwell made 9 of them. So that similarity is remarkable. And then game 2 back at Perth, where they had a chance to end that championship drought. 2 years ago, Marina Mabry had a free throw with no time left on the clock to send the game to overtime, and she missed. And the Boomers then went on to win that game and win game 3 back in Melbourne. This game too in Perth on Thursday night, the captain Annalie Maley had the Flyers were terrific all game, so they were on top.
They were
but
great, yeah.
The Lynx were making a charge late. Maley had 2 free throws that would have put them in front for the first time in the game. She couldn't make either of them, and then they forced a turnover up the other end. She had a chance at a layup, couldn't make it. Had a couple of chances at a putback and couldn't manage that either. And then we saw an incredible Mercedes Russell shot at the end to win the game for the Flyers. How can you have two series 2 years apart that are so similar?
So similar. I don't know. It's actually pretty scary, isn't it? And I mean, watching that game yesterday was wild, and it was a bit like deja vu, you know, seeing it. And then look, Annalie, God, you got to feel for her. She wouldn't be feeling too crash hot today, I wouldn't think. And look, as much as you can tell someone after something like that, like it's cool, like don't worry about it, move on, next game. That will haunt her for quite some time, unfortunately. I mean, the best thing she can do is come out and have a big game in the next game. So, look, you're right. It's almost like it's written. The fact that it's like, just use the same script as 2 years ago, you know? So, you know, hopefully for the Lynx that it doesn't end the same way and they can go back to Melbourne and get a Game 3 win.
The two teams couldn't be more different. So you've got the Lynx that play at the fastest pace. They want to be a three-point shooting team, and you know they play with such energy. Ari McDonald is the fastest player I think we've probably ever seen in the WNBL. Then you've got Annalie Maley, who plays at such pace. You've got Amy Atwell, who wants to just get a shot up as quickly as possible. But then you've got the experience and the size and the quality from the Flyers with Lauren Jackson, but also Mercedes Russell who hits that shot. Carly Ernst came out and played huge minutes for them as well. Beck Cole, their captain, was incredible defensively on Atwell after that game 1, but also she had her moments offensively. Maddie Rocky was terrific as well. They couldn't be more contrasting in styles. As a result of that, what happens in Game 3?
I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. It's a tough one. Look, I think it's a pretty tall task for the Lynx after that kind of bit of a demoralising loss. Even though, you know, it was a bit similar to what the Melbourne and Illawarra Hawks first game was, right? I don't think the Lynx were in that game really at all. You know, it was you know, a big third quarter for them for sure, and then another big fourth quarter, which was great. You know, I think, you know, for Southside, that Cole played the most captain's game that you're going to see, and was elite. And you know, the job she did on Atwell was very impressive. And then you're right, you know, scoring on the other end of the floor as well. But you know, Lauren Jackson didn't have one of her better games that we've seen, and they still found out a way to win. And you know, Mercedes Russell is a beast. It's unbelievable. And that last shot she hit was over 3 or 4 outstretched hands, and it was a heck of a game. And that's something that it's something that you take momentum going back home with, and it's going to be. It's a tough one, and we spoke about this before we actually started recording, in that you feel like it's going to be a blowout either way. It's just kind of primed for that big game from, you know, 1 or 2 players that is just going to blow the game open early, and it's going to be a big hole to get yourselves out of, especially in a Game 3 after playing 2 pretty good games already.
Well, that Lauren Jackson Annalie Maley matchup is incredible. I mean, there's a size difference there, but they are the 2 power forwards on their respective teams. It could be one of them that plays match winner.
Yeah, I think so. And look, we've seen it from Lauren countless times. And I think, you know, Annalie's got to take this game out of her head completely. As hard as that is to do, and that's something that it's almost impossible to do. But you've got to turn that into a positive, and, you know, all that anger and angst and, you know, frustration, you got to take that out onto the court, you know, and kind of put everything out on the line. And look, I have no doubt that she'll come out ready to go. But look, it's going to be an interesting Game 3, and honestly, I have no idea. I think going back to Melbourne plays into the Flyers' hands for sure, especially the way the game finished. But I don't think you can ever count this Lynx team out the way they're playing.
That'll be on Sunday. Also on Sunday, Game 1 of the NBL Championship Series. So head to TABtouch, download the TABtouch app, or go to tabtouch.com.au to find out plenty of different odds, and check out our exclusive that you've come up with as well for this game. Cody will try to help you make some money, but right now we need you to help us find a winner. How are you feeling? We've got plenty of time to talk about the whole series next week, but how are you feeling coming into Game 1?
Yeah, look, it's going to be a fun series. I do think it probably goes all the way, at least four games. I hope we get a fifth. That'd be great if it went the full length. I think Tassie win it all. I really think they win it. I just think that it's look, they've kind of had Melbourne's number this year for sure, but
and even beyond that, they're the ones that knocked them out
in
2 years ago to get to their
first
grand final.
I mean, the fact that Tassie's in a second championship series in their first 3 years of coming together is.
And they were
wild.
a real chance last year to get there as well.
They were.
They've had 3 incredible seasons.
Yeah, very impressive. So, look, I think this is the year that they get it done. Melbourne will have that 2 years ago knockout on their mind for sure, because there's a few players there that were part of that. So that'll certainly be on their mind. And yeah, look, I think if they can figure out how to deal with the bigs and probably keep Chris Goulding quiet, I think Delhi's going to be effective regardless. I'm not sure how you'd stop him the way he plays and how strong he is and just his relentless effort. But I think it's some of those other guys that Tassie have got to figure out how to slow down. And on the other end, I mean, look, you got 2 of the best defenders in the league in Delhi and Shea, and they're going to have to do a job. I think LT is going to have a big job on Milton Doyle, and that's going to be a fun matchup to watch. I think Tassie end up getting it. I do. But, I mean, Melbourne obviously pre-season favourites and all that, so it's going to be a heck of a series.
I think we've got a perfect matchup in so many ways because Tasmania, like we touched on, have had the wood over Melbourne for all 3 years, but also I think these are the 2 best built teams. Yeah. They're the best coached teams. I think you can make a strong argument for. Most importantly, they're fully healthy.
Yes.
Knock on wood. Hopefully that stays that way. But there's every reason to think this is going to be an incredible series because both teams feel like they're absolutely on top of their games.
Yeah, they are. They're both probably playing some of their better basketball that we've seen this season. So, Melbourne took a bit of a slide towards the end of the season, as well as Perth did, like we mentioned. But I think they really found their groove and their touch again late in that Hawks series. So they're playing as good as they've played. And Tassie, same thing. They're just playing elite basketball and playing Tassie JackJumper basketball, and it's primed for a big series.
So we'll come back next week and see if you change your prediction from Tasmania after one game.
Yep.
But coming into this series, who would your grand final MVP be if you had to?
I had it as Magnay to start start when I said Tassie would win it. I had Magnay as the MVP of the finals.
I don't think there's a reason to change, is there?
No,
is there?
I'll stick with it. I do think that if Tassie is going to win, he's going to have to be super important. He's going to have a big series. A lot of the times we see it as someone that probably scores the most points, and you'd expect probably Milton Doyle or someone along those lines, Jack McVeigh, even to bother the scoreboard a lot more. But I think Magnay's influence is going to be paramount.
All right, Cody, that's been a lot for us to cover. We might have only had a few games to look back on, but there was a lot to talk about. So I hope everyone enjoyed us breaking it down. We look forward to a massive Sunday. So it'll start with the Southside Flyers and the Perth Lynx in the WNBL Grand Final decider. Go straight in the same city. It's remarkable, but they've got the timing worked out. Yeah. So if you're in Melbourne, you can go to both.
Yeah, it's good.
So then go along to John Cain Arena to watch Melbourne United against the Tasmania JackJumpers in Game 1. We've been here thanks to Hoop 7 and TABtouch as always. I'm Chris Pike. I'll leave it there and leave you to sign off with whatever's on your mind, Cody.
Yeah, Grand Final basketball. Nothing better, right? I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good weekend.
He'll make it for sure. Now that's why I backed him on TABtouch.
Hey, Luke!
Yes, Gene Simmons?
He's probably the best when it comes to this stuff!
Thanks, Gene.
You've got the touch! You got the touch. You got the power. Got the touch? Choose TABtouch. Better your bet. Download the app today.
Chances are you're about to lose. For free and confidential support, call 1-800-858-858 or visit gamblinghelponline.org.au.